So like we'll have a hypothesis and want to do something new with some new technology. We try and remove ourselves from the thought experiment in a way that means, we can be quite practical and pragmatic.
You have to give people space to make mistakes if you want to have innovation.
Welcome to The Thinking Leader, brought to you by Red Team Thinking. Bad leaders react, good leaders plan, and great leaders think. Each week, you'll get new ideas and insights from business executives, military experts, and innovative thought leaders to help you lead more effectively and better navigate your complex world. Now, here are your hosts, best-selling business author and top-rated leadership speaker, Bryce Hoffman, and former RAF Wing Commander and business agility coach, Dimbleby.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Thinking Leader. Marcus, who do we have joining us today?
Who do we have today? A man I've been chasing for a while, and he's eventually joining us, which is great. So we have Oliver Yonchev, who is the managing director of Social Chain. If you don't know who they are, I suggest you look them up. But they were a startup that grew to a 750 million revenue public company with 1,400 plus people operating across 21 locations. He's now the co-founder, along with Stephen Bartlett, and the CEO of Flight Story, a new service platform introducing communication at the forefront of what's possible. And for over a decade, Oliver has been at the forefront of digital, social, and creative services, helping guide the management teams of the world's most successful companies. Check this out: Amazon, Apple, Coca-Cola, TikTok, Twitch, Disney.
Oh, wait, I've heard of some
Uber.
of those.
Yeah. Oliver, it is great to have you here today. Welcome.
Yeah, really good to be here, Jen. I'm looking forward to speaking.
Excellent. That's wonderful.
It is. And I know you've been doing a lot of talking today. So let's just kick off with, how are you?
Good. It's, what time is it? 5:15 here. We're in the middle of launching lots of things. We're a very ambitious business, which the responsibility of mine often falls in communicating what we're doing, and that involves creating lots of content. And I am at the point at the end of the day where I am incredibly fatigued with my own voice. You guys make content, you understand. But other than that, life is good. I'm blessed.
I want to jump right off from the start. I was looking at Flight Story's website, and you have a statement on there that is one of my mantras that I talk about in my last book. Change is the only constant. And I'm curious, why is that front and center on your website?
Yeah, I think, when we started Flight Story, our guiding principles were kind of three things. One, what are we good at? It's probably a good starting place. What value can we create in the world? That was a starting place. The other was a reflection of previous endeavors. Where did we gain advantages? What did we do well? What did we do not so well? And then the final was opportunity. And the really interesting space for us, the previous business Social Chain, was very much a benefactor of social media becoming increasingly important in the world. It's changed the way business is done. It's changed the way we communicate. It's changed the fabric of society. And if I think of the probably catalyst moments throughout the history, social media would be up there. It's pretty up there in terms of how it's changed lots of things.
Absolutely.
And we reflected a lot on that. And for me, change is not a word people like. It's intimidating. It's confusing. And actually, if you reverse engineer that, change is always a place of opportunity. Where there are unknowns, someone has to go and figure out what the knowns are. So for me, starting a business, it was it's quite a fulfilling place to operate at the forefront of change. And I would say if I look at the macro environment right now, and if you think of these big moments, whether it was COVID, whether it's this new domain or this next reiteration of the internet, Web3, whether it's technology more broadly, whether it's AI, all the developments that are happening right now, the rate of change is truly profound. If we zoomed out for a minute, you would see this and it would seem like a blip in the universe. Like the way I described this, a year ago, no one had heard the word ChatGPT. Now you can't go online, or hundreds and hundreds of millions of people are now using ChatGPT. A year ago, it wasn't a word anyone understood. So for me, that is a very rich territory for anyone to operate under. And I think it's one rife with opportunity. And fundamentally, we are a marketing and communication business. And, I think it's a really good anchor point to help organizations figure out what do they do when all this change happens.
How does AI change Marcom in your mind?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think AI changes everything for a number of reasons. AI is not a new thing. Ever since science fiction models, since the Ray Kurzweil singularity idea, man and machine at some point were headed on a crash to come together. I think what's really been profound about the last year is the real world application of AI. What started with, very much how do these language models benefit us in our day-to-day tools? And my view a year ago was these things are really cool. And as a business, if we can be 10 times more efficient as a consequence of removing administrative tasks that take time, if AI can make us more efficient, that's a good thing. Then I started to rethink my entire philosophy on the role of AI as you start to see more and more people developing. So you're starting to see before it was it's going to be an aid. It's going to be an aid to support an industry. Now I'm it's going to replace certain industries, right? When you start to see these things develop. And then the bit for me that is kind of the unknown in the change equation is what does all of this mean for society? Because there is a ton of unintended consequences. We talk about the ethics of AI. What does this mean? A few days ago, Elon Musk and Steve
Wozniak.
Yeah, they come out and say, which I also think is a little hypocritical, if I'm being honest. But they're saying,
just
exactly that.
Everybody stop doing what you're doing and let us figure it out.
Everybody stop doing the thing that we've poured billions of dollars into doing.
Yeah, it's kind of a little hypocritical. However, I do think their concerns are somewhat probably genuine, because I think they're recognizing, wow, this is changing things very quickly. And there are so many new regulatory considerations. Even just take something like IP. Right now we have governance that says, if you create something, I can't steal from you, but I can be inspired from you. And those distinctions are somewhat clear, not perfect. You start to extrapolate and go, well, in a generated world that is powered by machine learning, what does that mean for IP? Those distinctions have got very, very narrow from inspiration to stealing, right? So suddenly we're going to have to have
artists saying, that some of these graphic AIs are stealing their styles, and stuff, and they are based on the input of actual artists. So where's the line, like you say?
Yeah, well, this is all built on real input. And, I think everyone from regulators, governments, builders, entrepreneurs, I think everyone has to pay attention. And it's very easy to get caught into the mindset of these things are fads because of the way in which everybody has sort of gone all in and really enthusiastic about these new possibilities. It's very easy to trivialize it. However, I would say this feels different to previous movements in a way where if the biggest cost to society right now is intelligence, hiring people, developing skills, when that cost is almost eradicated to zero or vastly reduced, that changes the entire system. That changes the way we think about economic models. That changes the way we think about business. So a long way of saying, how does it affect Marcom? A lot.
Everything. So what this is all bringing really is this word disruption. And you talked about change and how that scares people. Disruption scares people as well. And the field we're in, we talk a lot about deliberate disruption. So we try and help people to be disruptive. And that's often seen more of a sort of young people, Gen Z type of game and it alienates other markets and other individuals. But as we're seeing, you have to disrupt yourself, because if you don't, you are going to be disrupted by something. And as quick as we've seen ChatGPT grow and how that's affected people. what are you seeing, and where are you helping with the flight story capability of bringing disruption in as a core capability and helping people really understand the power of being able to disrupt?
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there about you guys being really intentional with disruption, because I think it's a loaded word, right? To your point, it comes with many preconceived conceptions about what it means. And it's quite an aggressive word when you say disruption. If I think of most things in my life, I don't want them to be disrupted. It's kind of good. So I can understand that. I can understand that sort of initial reaction. My view on disruption is you have to think a little more holistically about disruption. Disruption happens all the time in micro moments. So then there's certain times in history where disruption truly changed a lot of things. And I think we're at one of those sort of catalyst moments when you think of machine learning, blockchain technology, just all of these things sort of conflating at the same time. What I would say where our role and responsibility is, our first foundation is trying to learn and understand about these emerging technologies and really stress test them. It's not about being naive. And you mentioned there before about young people. I think the reason young people are seen as disruptors is because they're often naive. They're not beaten with a life stick. They don't know better. And I genuinely believe, I believe in something called the curse of knowledge. And I think through experience, you gather knowledge, but I do believe it can also be a curse.
Absolutely. That's something we teach all the time, is curse of knowledge.
Yeah, curse of knowledge, ego, all of these things come into play and actually stop you being a disruptor. The way I tend to think our job and our role is probably not too dissimilar to you guys is we have to understand and learn these technologies. And I always think an organization is really successful if it leaves 20% room for doing new things, to evolve, to adapt. So we pay a lot of attention, we try stuff, we encourage, and as an organization, we actually ensure that we value experimentation. So we don't ever reward anyone for having a really good outcome to trying something new. Well, we do, but generally we reward people that try new stuff. But
I love that.
Yeah, we try and be pragmatic about also being, very unattached to ideas. So we'll have a hypothesis and want to do something new with some new technology. We'll try it, but we try not to, we try and remove ourselves from the thought experiment in a way that means, we can be quite practical and pragmatic.
Well, you have to give people space to make mistakes if you want to have innovation. And this is true of technology, but it's also true of thinking in the cognitive realm. One of the precursors that led to the development of red teaming was a team that the Israelis created in their military intelligence group that we talk about called Ipsha Mistabra, which is Aramaic for "on the contrary, the opposite may be true." And when I was writing my last book and I was talking to one of the heads of Ipsha Mistabra, he said, the secret to our success is that our analysts in this group are not judged by how often they're right. They're judged by how deeply they get the rest of the organization to think. Because if they were being judged by how often they were right, they would pull punches. The job of this group is to challenge the thinking of Israeli military intelligence. So if you want people to challenge the thinking of an organization, they can't be safe. They can't be afraid to speak up. And it's that ability to create that space which it sounds exactly like what you're talking about in a different arena, where people have the ability to try new things, to throw things out there, to challenge hypotheses. And it's the challenge that's rewarded, not the outcome.
It's very rare that organizations, particularly the larger they get, that they either hold that philosophy. They typically don't reward risk, right? There's very few large organizations that reward risk. The ones that seem to be titans of industry that almost embed this into their values. Amazon are famously known for failing more than most people at most things, right? Yep. And I have this view of one of our fundamental values is we outfail the competition. Our job is in our DNA, we say we want to outfail. And it's a bit of a sport analogy. The Michael Jordans of the world have missed more shots than anyone else, but that's because they've achieved greatness. So I think the romantic in me sees, winning teams of having this philosophy. But if you look across business, particularly emerging giants, they always have a deep-rooted respect for new things. but then they
Right.
You have to.
the right systems and processes to mean they aren't attached to those ideas. One of the things I was speaking to the team about earlier was people are blown away by this idea that giant tech companies will spend hundreds of millions on an app that has tens of millions of users, seemingly very successful, and then just end the company. People are blown away by that idea. But for me, it makes all the sense in the world, because their mission, to everybody else, that's like seemingly successful business. To them, it doesn't move the needle. So they're about being intentional and focused, but they are willing to spend hundreds of millions on an experiment. And that's why they will continue probably to dominate, to monopolize and consolidate, because they have stronger values that make you effective at business today.
And to me, that shows an appreciation of the world we're now living in from a business perspective. And it's what we're talking about with AI and with disruption. It's this complex environment we live in. And we talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, but it's this complexity. And if you're operating in complexity, there are no answers. So you have to create hypotheses. You have to experiment. And if you create that safe to fail environment where your people can test and learn and prove or disprove, then that's how you get greatness. You probe, you sense, respond. And we work a lot with Dave Snowden, that Kneving framework of understanding these types of problems you're facing. And the majority today are complex. And I don't think many of the bigger, larger organizations understand that yet. They're seeing it on the daily news feed. They're seeing AI. They're seeing what LinkedIn's telling them. But I still don't think it seems to have sunk in, because they're not changing their approach, and they're certainly not changing their thinking, which is where we try and focus on helping.
Well, it's what Oliver said about, they don't reward risk, right?
Yeah.
And, to me, the biggest proof that an organization doesn't reward risk is if they're bringing in McKinsey or Bain or Deloitte to tell them what to do, because that's the safe route. Because even if it's wrong, it's got their stamp on it, And I Marcus knows this conversation. I was talking to the CEO of a large company, and I was challenging him. I said, "Why are you have 300 people on your team who have the word strategy in their title? Why are you bringing in McKinsey to develop strategy for you?" And he said, "Because it's a win-win for me. If they tell me something new and it works, I get credit for a successful program. If they're wrong and it fails, it's their fault, and I don't get blamed, because who's going to fault me for hiring McKinsey?"
No one is fired for hiring McKinsey, but you can certainly be fired for hiring the disruptive thinker that will tell you what you're great at and tell you what you're not. There has to be,
or being that thinker yourself as a leader. You could get fired for being that disruptive thinker yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I also think sector by sector, I think we're in a place. I have certain biases in the sense that I've often worked in media marketing, technology services, generally on the more forward-thinking sectors broadly. So I have these biases, but we often service very conservative sectors, and you are certainly not rewarded for trying anything new. I remember for the longest time, 6 years ago, we would say to companies, you should pay attention to TikTok. And the world would go, yeah, it's this kids thing. My kids are on it. It's just come out of Musical.ly. It's for kids. Say, well, when you look at the data, it's not actually kids. 70% of the audience are over 25. You have a view. It's certainly got, a lot of content that's relevant for kids. It's trivialized because it's built on, young people, trends, dances and such. So 90% of people ignored us until one of their competitors or someone else did something and got the kind of disproportionate or outweighted results. And the 10% that did pay attention to us are now winning, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just that innovation and disruption isn't always like the most fringe technology or the 20th horizon revolution. Yeah. It can be that, where is attention now? Where is opportunity now? And we have this thesis. We've got this kind of term we're playing around with internally. And we say the gap between now and next is closing. It's a bit of a marketeer's statement. We are, like marketeers, we can be full of bullshit sometimes. So we can speak in these terms. However,
but it makes sense.
Yeah, and the gap between now and next is closing. And we try and look at our lens or our value add to our partners as, how can we help you now? Here's a whole mandate of things that you could do and should do. How can we help you next? And that's the framework, this now and next, what we're trying to embed in our philosophy of a value add as advisors to companies.
This is Gordie Howe, skate to where the puck's going to be.
Yeah.
famous Canadian hockey player. It's really an important concept. He was famously asked, "What's your secret to winning?" He says, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is."
Foresight. Yeah, it's having that foresight, isn't it? And if you do that analysis, if you're testing those hypotheses, it's going to allow you to future-proof, to future-see, and your people to understand where they need to be at the right time. And that's that enablement and empowerment that we often don't see enough of. You talked about some of these organizations, obviously marketing, front leading, others not so much. Have you done any work with large public sectors?
Oh, yeah. It can be painful at times. It can absolutely be
We know.
I talk about private markets. If I start talking about public markets, government initiatives, I can extrapolate and say, wow, that's really offensive, actually.
It's a whole new level of offense. Brilliant.
Well, I'm curious. You talked about the different. Working with the companies like Apple and Amazon, and then working with more conservative companies. How do you challenge the more conservative companies to get out of their comfort zone?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think even the most conservative business in the world, there's part of their self-image that wants to do interesting new things. That's a universal truth. So there's never usually a shortage of willingness to do those things. It's usually finding the right incentive, building the right business cases, and actually making compromises on what challenges or problems you're going to tackle. So I'll give you one good example. A lot of our programs with conservative organizations is before they may have a specific ask of us. We want to promote this product, or we want to promote this service, help us come up with a marketing plan to do so. And our job often is before we take that step, we usually take a step back and say, can we be the naive voice in the room? Let's spend some time with your teams. We want to spend 3 or 4 weeks with you. And we just want to stress test your thinking. And, at the end of this process, we're either going to find out what enablers or blockers exist from helping you do the things you want to do. And then we can be a lot more practical about how we then deliver this together. So for us, our first step is we run 6 sessions with a company. We've actually tried to codify it as a program, but it's quite a loose program. We pick 3 goals that they want to do. We pick 8 stakeholders that are contributors to that, and we go and ask questions. And our job is simply to listen. We go away, rationalize it, and we come up with a plan that is, here are like 8 things you can take away. And if you never work with us again, hopefully you've either got more conviction, to your point earlier, in what we've said, like you're doing the right things, or there's a new way of thinking here. There's some new initiatives or programs or projects that you could try out. So we're very much, as a marketing business, we probably look more like consultants at problems, because I think our value add is trying to probably be like beyond marketing, because marketing is this omnipresent thing that can do so much. It can do wonders for organizations. But I think in isolation, any of these initiatives never reach their full potential. Like if you as an organization aren't thinking of the broader context, you'll never truly do your best work. And I think the best thing in conservative organizations, to go back to your question, you can do, is figure out a way to bring as many stakeholders with you. And that often means going slower than you would like. So our job with conservative organizations, we usually go slower. Our commercial motives and our want is to move fast, but sometimes just taking the time to truly understand an organization is what you actually need to A, build trust and build the authority to be able to drive through an initiative, but B, put you in a better position to empathize. Like, I don't know the blockers. I can assume most companies are the same, right? Everybody's like, finance team is stopping me doing what I want to do. Legal team is super annoying.
IT stop providing.
CEO knows nothing about marketing. These are universal truths, right? Generally. So, similar blockers, but that's our process.
I love that, the naive voice in the room.
Yeah.
That is such a powerful concept. That's a very red teamy sort of concept. If you look back in the 1950s, a psychologist, Ash, whose work led to the development of the concept of groupthink, he figured out that in a controlled setting, if you have one person in a room who gives a different answer than the group, even if it's a wrong answer, it enables everyone else to think for themselves. And so being that naive voice is asking simple, obvious questions that people aren't willing or able to ask themselves. And I think that if I'm imagining that when you're doing that, that half the people in the room, if not more, are also starting to ask themselves questions they haven't asked.
Or haven't been afraid not to ask,
Yeah, there's the enablers of like setting the precedence that it's okay. Amazon have a really interesting philosophy where, the leader of the group, the most senior figure speaks last. That's a really simple process you can adopt in a meeting that kind of enables the right types of habits and behaviors to allow more people to contribute and not influence the group, right? With the most authoritative voice, let's say. Like we've been through this process ourselves. We actually stress test our own thinking. So if you said to me, why do you exist? Like our why, we say, we keep brands at the forefront of what's possible. Actually, so if you went to me, well, why does that matter? Like stress test that. I'm going, well, because the world is changing and, the unprecedented change means unprecedented opportunity. So being at the forefront of that is like a huge lean in. And then they'll go like, well, how do you do it? So it's like going through the really simple, basic questions, and stress testing thinking is so important, particularly early on in any foundational relationship. And I think having the humility to know what you don't know and bring out outside counsel, we do it. We're a very capable business. I'm biased, but I think we're the best in the world at marketing. That said, we bring in other people to either fill in gaps or stress test our own thinking. It's really important. I've seen like world-class design outfits, like designers that are incredible at creating visual art, bring in other designers to do their design, right? I think it's so important that you have these collective voices that can shape the best answers.
And isn't that true consultancy? Isn't that what consultancy was actually developed for? Expertise that you don't have. And you bring that in when you need it to build your own expertise and fill a problem or solve a problem that you don't have. And I think, we've seen that dilution by the big groups, charlatan behavior, selling everything that they don't really have the promise to deliver. But I think, as you said, Oliver, having that capability, and I think having the humility internally to recognize you need that. And we've done that, haven't we? Recently, Bryce, we've created a Circle community, and we brought a consultant in from Circle to help us really understand how to set it up. And it's paid huge dividends. And when we told somebody the other day about it, they were like, that thing you said the other day, did you actually do that? Or were you just saying that? We're like, no, we actually did it because it was worth the investment and it's proven itself. So I think that's a really smart thing out there for leaders listening. If you don't know, ask your people. If they don't know, and recognize the fact they don't, search the skill set you require and find the actual core capable individual or group out there who are the best at doing what they do.
Yeah, there was two things that really resonated on that topic with me that changed the way I think about. My natural inclination is to try and do a lot of stuff myself or try and find the answer myself, but I have to resist that because it was the idea of you only have to make a few good decisions. Like if you make a few good decisions every year, you will do really well as an organization. You don't need to make lots of good decisions. And I remember hearing about venture capitalist Chamath, the early Facebook engineer, ran a pretty successful fund, got a big social following. And he says he pays a consultant when he needs to learn about climate tech. He will pay a McKinsey or so, like 9 months and pay them way too much to bring in some world leading experts and curate him an event so that he can make better decisions. They'll create him a program. So he comes 9 months in and he knows climate tech better than 99.9% of the world because he spent however many tens of millions curating the world's most authorities to come speak with him. But the upside of him making a good decision at the sort of level he's operating is astronomical, right? So
absolutely.
I think that's really important to not try and be everything to everyone. But just really leaning into the things you're great at and recognizing where you need help.
Well, it's really interesting what you say there, Oliver, because that to me is an appropriate use of McKinsey. Because what he's hiring them for is not to tell him what to do or make the decision. He's hiring them to bring together the experts who can educate him. And that is, Marcus says, that's the appropriate role of a consultant. I always like to share, Andrew Carnegie famously said that he wanted on his tombstone, here lies a man who knew how to surround himself with people who knew more than he did. And that's the appropriate role. It's not outsourcing decision making. It's not outsourcing thinking. That's our motto, is don't outsource thinking. He's not outsourcing thinking to McKinsey. He's using them to bring him insights so he can think. And that goes back to what we were talking about with AI, I think. I mean, the thing that I've been preaching for at least 5 years is that most people are missing the point, the opportunity with AI. Mm-hmm. The opportunity with AI is not to replace human thinkers. It's as a force multiplier for human decision making, because there's no human on the planet who can see patterns, process large amounts of data, draw meaningful conclusions from that the way that an AI can. But then using that as an input to your decision making as a human being is the real opportunity, I think, not letting the machine make the decision for you.
Yeah, you know what? That's been my, and I will play devil's advocate to that. I will challenge that, because that's been my view, and I think it's the most logical. But I have such a profound change. My friend was playing with a generative art tool, and his view, and I kind of shared that, was that, this will aid product photography. You can start to develop mood boards based on prompts. I'll make a description of what I want to see, and it's used as inspiration to aid the creative process. And I'm speaking about a very specific user case. He showed me what he created, and he basically said, into a language model, design a new British fashion collection through the vehicle of like the royal family. And the product photography that developed off the back of this, slightly off, but you go, that is phenomenal. And that would cost Burberry, it would cost Burberry hundreds of thousands to curate that caliber of aesthetic and shot. Mm-hmm. Is truly transformative. So my part was, it was going to enable us to be better. I see a year from now, it's almost product photography is redundant. Product photography doesn't actually need to exist anymore. So that's where my view is completely transformed, and go, there will be sectors that are just eliminated. And it reminded me a bit of I think of just general stuff about a lot of law. A lot of law, by definition, I think ChatGPT-4 took the bar test, and 90% of the time it completes the bar test. That's insane and profound. So I think if you think of, you can spend 5 years at Harvard, you go into your first law firm, the first thing you will probably do at that point is you'll spend 3 years just reviewing contracts and Apple replacing words. That's no longer needed, right?
Right.
So I start to go, as much as I go, I share that opinion for the majority of roles, responsibilities, but I do genuinely think we are going to make some things extinct.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
100%. 100%.
I don't think we'll make them as extinct as quickly, because it's, I think he's called Ray Amara. He has this really interesting quote where he says, technology, technology, we overestimate what technology will do in the short term, but underestimate it in the long.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the thesis here. We're maybe a bit bullish on some things that might not truly transform, but there'll be other things that just eradicate entire sectors. So I'm trying to, because as I suppose an advisor to lots of different types of organizations, trying to think through the art of possible and the pros and cons and all these possibilities is really fascinating thought territory.
See, I think I agree with you completely. I think there's going to be areas that are absolutely replaced. And I could totally see that fashion line being developed. But if you ask that same AI, what should our split of our fashion portfolio be 5 years from now between these three different market sectors? I think that a human decision maker is going to make a better decision informed by AI when it comes to that sort of strategic thinking, rather than...
Let's try it. Let's run an experiment right now and come back in 5 years.
Yeah. See, you know what? I think by the way, you're right. I think there's a part that goes, it levels up the average. So AI,
great way of thinking it.
And actually it puts a distinction for excellence, originality, and thinking that doesn't currently exist yet. That's got to be derived from somewhere. It's probably not the machine that will do that. However, what I would say is I had a renewed sort of definition a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, around what creativity is. And creativity is the foundation of most innovation. It's been thought into
Sure.
the world through. And most people's view on creativity is its originality. They conflate originality and creativity. They're not the same thing. Creativity is bringing together different sources of inspiration and creating something new. So by definition, if you think of creativity, it's basically what machine learning models are doing right now. It's piecing together different inspiration and creating something new. So the human side of me that wants to value my own skills and like I'm resistant. There's every part of me is going, a machine can't think like me or do certain things better than me. But then I just kind of go, yeah, it probably can. Like eventually.
Acceptance of reality.
Yeah, maybe eventually it probably is going to, but maybe not super quick. I might just have to admit and concede.
No. Don't go gently into that. Good night. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we will dive deeper into this. Hey, folks, Bryce here. If you're listening to this and you're liking what you're hearing and you're wondering, am I a red team thinker? We have an easy way for you to find out. Just go to the show notes, click on the link there to our free assessment to find out if you are a red team thinker and what you can do to think more effectively, to lead more effectively, and to make better decisions faster in your complex world. Like I said, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply go to our website, redteamthinking.com. Check it out. I can't wait to see how you score. Welcome back. So, I was thinking during the break, Oliver, you talked about how people are resistant to change, afraid of change. And I think the reason why I do what I do for a living is because I love change. And I love it to the point that I was a journalist for 20 years. And people used to ask me when I was a journalist, why are you in this low paying field when you could do so many other things? And I said, because I don't have the attention span to do anything else. That used to be the great thing about being a journalist, is that every day you'd come to work and have a new topic to cover, a new discipline to learn. But journalism obviously has changed a lot. And we were talking during the break, you mentioned, Oliver, that you were at South by recently, and so a lot of discussion about how AI was going to impact journalism. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, definitely. It's really fascinating. So South by, usually has like the shining topic. And of course, last year was NFTs and crypto and the blockchain. This year it was AI. AI is usually a running theme of South by, but one of the more interesting discussions I landed upon was around journalism. And obviously, journalism is kind of this art that has been called into question, because a lot of journalism today isn't journalism. It's creating headlines and the kind of new commercial models that exist around
Content.
Content. It's content, actually, is a better framing. Absolutely. It's content, not journalism. And actually, when you think of that juxtaposition, the room for journalism, or the want for real journalism, is probably stronger than it's ever been, right? I think there's a real want. One of the conversations that went on at South by that I found interesting was two opposing views of, how will AI affect journalism at mass? And I think there was a consensus that journalists will move away from being writers to editors in many respects. A lot of the desk research will be done much faster, so you can achieve and write more. A lot of the first drafts and the writing will be done by the machine, right? And actually, as organizations, if you think of like editorial control, you can start to overlay tone of voice, brand call outs. There's some real, as an organization, it's transformative to think you can start to have a controlled narrative around independent journalism. So the optimists in the room say, as businesses, we can now run way more efficient, achieve a lot more, produce more content, and in turn, commercialize that. Then there was the devil's advocate about, well, does that continue to erode journalism, right? Journalism. And like my takeaway with that is absolutely, I think journalism has already been on a decline. I think we see less and less of journalism and more content. Yep. And I think that's just going to increase. However, my view is there's always a counterculture. I think the demand for real journalism, and actually if you say as a journalist, I can now be more efficient, I can do my research faster, I can do my drafts faster, I can get things reviewed quicker. If all these things can happen, what can journalists do? They can spend more time investigating, thinking of unique narratives, doing all the things that currently a robot cannot do. So, I think the overall conversation around AI and journalism was somewhat of a positive one, but there are risks associated with commoditization and actually there's a big ethical question in journalism. If AI is powering a lot of the media we consume, will that inherently have bias? I think most things inherently have bias, but it is one of those big ethical debates where you go, how do I feel about this? What should we do?
Well, I love this conversation because I love it as a former journalist, and I love it because this, to me, is a great case study that gets into the challenge and the opportunity of artificial intelligence. So, first of all, as a former journalist, I quit journalism in 2013 for the very reason that journalism by that point was shifting away from what I had signed up for to content creation. And I spent my whole career at daily newspapers, and, daily newspapers went from valuing deep analytical pieces, which is what I won a lot of awards for, to post this as faster than anyone else can on Twitter. Doesn't matter if it's right, we'll fix it later. And so obviously AIs are going to beat journalists or what passes for journalism today. Because the skill set of the typical journalist is a lot lower today than it was when I started in the business. That's obvious. But this is the interesting thing that you say, is that there still is a demand for real journalism. It's not being met by any of the mainstream media companies because it's not profitable compared to just churning out content. And it's unfortunate because I do think that they just haven't figured out how to do that, how to monetize it. But this gets into a fundamental thing about AI. So, as I said, what attracted me to journalism and why I considered myself a successful journalist was because what I did was not report, it was to provide context. Mm-hmm. My best pieces, the pieces that I won awards for, were the result of spending weeks or months talking to every person who was involved in a major issue, hearing different perspectives, and then synthesizing that into something that says, this is how this situation looks, and here's the different points of view, and here's the implications of that. And when I think about that, I think about a few years ago, before he passed away, I was doing some work with Paul Allen. And he asked me to come to Seattle and spend some time at all of his different institutes. And I spent a few days at his AI Institute, which is one of the top AI institutes in the world. And I was struggling to understand the challenge and opportunities of AI. And I was talking to his lead scientist. And I said, what are the limits of AI? And Seattle. So behind me in the conference room is a beautiful picture of a woman kayaking on Puget Sound. And he said, here's the opportunity and the limits of AI. He said, right now, our best AI, we could feed it that picture, and it could tell you that is a picture of a 31-year-old woman kayaking at these geo coordinates in Puget Sound, probably on this date and time, because it can find the patterns of this to know where this is, where, looking through an image library of hundreds of millions of images. It can look at the angle of the sun to figure out the time and the date. It can look at this woman's facial features to come up with an estimate of her age. He said it can do all of that. And if you think about it, a human being couldn't do most of those things. However, he said, if we then say, what happens if we flip her upside down? The AI has no idea. And yet a 5-year-old could tell you, well, she's going to drown if she doesn't figure out how to right her kayak. And that is about context. Mm-hmm. It's about, the others are about understanding and processing data, but the latter is about context. And that's where I think AI is going to continue to struggle for some time.
But isn't that where social media struggles? We so often see images, quick sound bites, where people are triggered by it. We see a response to it, but the context isn't provided. And we can all post something that people respond to, but when you provide the context, they go, I didn't realize it was all about that. Because that's what journalism now becomes. It's those sound bites that get responses and get reactions and get hits and likes. And we see that in social media.
Yeah, I think what you're both describing is really fascinating because I think we talk about challenge opportunity there. You're describing the biggest opportunity, right? One of the big conversations around what is the distinction in AI models. Everyone is going to have the same foundational language. What's going to be the deciding factor is what's the context you overlay? What's the unique data set that gives you advantages? And I think that's the battle going on right now of figuring, okay, there's some dominant language models and the tech giants are now competing for the dominant base language. But where the emerging winners will come, and these are winners, pre-existing businesses that take advantage, but also new emergents, I think they start to look at these language models and overlay that context. And it was interesting, Bryce, you spoke about journalism, and it got me thinking, like, everything you're saying is true, but what I've seen is like our definitions of these things change wildly. Because if you think of the emergence of like people that aren't journalists, but write incredibly well and now create a Substack on a topic that they're passionate about, right?
Yes.
And like charge for it. So the commercial fragmentation is like part of the story. I just think how we consume news, where we go for news, where we take inspiration, I think that's all evolving at the same time. So I think these definitions of what you experienced as a elite journalist, I just think that's evolving. And great talent is probably can't morally stay in tune with just creating content, so they like do other things. I think that's probably true.
I mean, that's I think when I left journalism, I was certainly not the only person that I knew who was a well-regarded journalist who decided, this is not the same thing anymore, and I'm going to find another use for what I do.
Adapting to change. And that's the whole point, isn't it? And, we spoke a lot about AI today, and I really want to get to my passion, and that's people. We talked about AI, we talked about social media. We understand how we've been on this technological evolution over the last couple of decades, and we're often seduced by this technology. But at the heart of all of this is people. And we talked at the break, Oliver, and you talked about, you brought 100 new staff on, new people in your team recently. What is it that you look for in people? What is it you look for in yourself as a human individual surrounded by all this tech and this AI and this fast-moving, complex world? You've got some great success behind you. You've got some great innovation and future thinking with your companies and Flight Story. So the heart of all this for me is always people. That's the one thing that I always focus on. What do you focus on from a people perspective?
Yeah, I think there's two parts for me. The definition of a company is a group of people. So I think when we detach ourselves from that premise, we lose ourselves. It's so important that our orientation is anchored to we're only as good as our people. And then the second part of me goes, what do I personally find fulfilling? I reflect on things I've achieved. And unless you're doing it with people or you're working towards something with people you like, you trust, you respect, you learn from, it's not rewarding. So there's two lenses in which I view this. I have a deep respect for the importance of bringing together great people to try and achieve great things. Then there's a selfish part of me that goes, well, I know my own motivation is like doing stuff with people I like, which then changes the way I think about hiring. So my foundational philosophy, and I've thought about this a lot as we start to bring in more people into the organization, is like, what can we do to enrich? The questions I ask is, how do we create a place that's really rewarding for everybody? And people in work have very similar needs. I think if you took a straw consensus, what do we all want? We all want a sense of forward motion. We all want to feel secure. We all want to be respected and rewarded. And we all want to know that the things in our contributions mean something. So if I think of that, we have a responsibility as an organization to build really meaningful values, be very clear at communicating what we do, create environments that reward people, and fulfillment and rewards can be like remuneration, cash, but it can also mean other things, experiences, development, all of those things. And we have to put that in a framework and rationalize it and write it down and just be so disciplined around those people policies and who we look for. And like the way I've started viewing Flight Story is we're not for everybody. Our company mission decides the team that we build. And our company mission is do unthinkable things in marketing and communication and really change the world around us and, do the best possible work. That requires a certain mindset. So we formed a set of values around that mission. And then we also now built the systems around those values to mean that that's the filter in which we hire people. It's the filter in which we reward people, and it's the filter in which we show progression in the company.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're the frameworks we've spent about a year building. And as you mentioned there, we're bringing in a lot of new people from different backgrounds and, different history and different ways of working. So my view is that unless we are crystal clear and we're this like magnetic core, when 100 new people join the business, we become like the 100 new people unless we are just this anchor point. So our job is to like be unapologetic. And we made decisions as a business very early. We're going to be office first. When the world's going remote, we believe in community doing stuff together. We recognize that there's like loads of good stuff about being remote, but for us, it's not right because of what we want to achieve. We decided like a whole host of policies off the bat and just being really intentional around these things. So yeah, to me, people is the foundation of who you are. Selfishly, I love people. I want to be around people. I learn from people. My best experiences are always shared. So I think about that a lot. And then when I look for people, I've got this like, someone asked me this the other day. They said, what's one thing that you would, if you were like, what's your number one like hiring tip? And I thought about that. It's like really hard to distill it down into one.
That's a toughie. Yeah.
Like one thing. And I went, hire optimistic people. Because like I go in a room and I go like, I like being around optimists. It's like really nice, the person. And it's not that there isn't room for pessimism or it isn't room for, being a negative voice. But I just go, if there's one thing, if you bring together loads of optimistic people, it's self-fulfilling in so many respects. So I went, if I was to give one rule, it's like, fill the room with optimists.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're talking about is creating a culture, right? Yeah. You're building a culture. And, this goes back to Deming's famous dictum that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. So if you don't invest in that culture, if you don't build that culture, if you don't decide what the culture of your organization is going to look like, and then enforce is a strong word. I would say model and reinforce that culture. You're right. You're going to be the one that's changed, not the...
You know what's fascinating, Bryce? You've said the culture eats strategy for business, and I've heard that said so many times, and I never actually connected with what it meant. Like it was only until the pretext of what I was just saying, how you reframe that, and I went, "Oh, I get it now." I actually know what it means now, and I've heard it so many times. But that was the first time I went, I actually get what that phrase means.
Because you've done it, because you've created that, as you said, that magnetic hub that people come in and they're drawn to it. They get it. And I love that we're unapologetic about who and what we are. And what that gives people is clarity. And the organization we work with, you so often speak to people and they just don't know. They're unsure of the value. They've seen the values on the wall, but they never see them lived. They're unsure of the intent, they're unsure of the direction, the strategies and meaningless mumbo jumbo. And I think if you create clarity across all spectrum of what we're talking about here for people, remuneration, where you're working, when we're working, what do we do, what do we stand for? That means so much because it brings that alignment that everybody can form a tribe under, and you get that tribalism of behavior. That's what creates, I think, true capabilities. You said people are company, and that's what the company is.
I'm a perhaps counterintuitively a big fan of Malcolm X, and find that he actually has a lot of amazing business quotes, though that's not how they were originally intended. One of my favorite quotes from Malcolm X is, if you don't stand for something, you'll go for anything.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to business and to organizations in a way that you just described, Oliver. If you don't stand for something, you'll go for anything, which means if you don't know what you're about and what matters, like you've made a decision about working in a physical office because that matters. And that gives you a structure that organizations that don't have an opinion are gonna vacillate on.
Yeah. And you mentioned as well there, Marcus, like you said, tribe. We say this a lot of, we're trying to build a cult and a code of philosophy that'll mean we're exceptional at what we do. And cult is like such a trigger word because of all the negative connotations, but the manifestation for that in a healthy way is you ask someone who just joins our business in 6 months and they sound a little like me in what we do. So what's Flight Story? And if we can achieve that in 6 months' time through our common language, that to me will be one of the biggest wins, because I think so few organizations ever achieve that, particularly as they scale. So that'll be a big win for us.
But you have to preserve your dissenters too, because if you don't, you'll over time become complacent and fall victim to groupthink.
Naive voice in the room.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say dissent. I saw a LinkedIn post relatively recent, and they were saying how in organizations we don't value the awkward person that's like completely just challenging, being a bit of a pessimist. So a lot of the things I'm saying that when I talk in generalisms, they're like good foundations. But yeah, you have to have those appreciations for the devil's advocate in the room, like the devil's advocate,
Absolutely.
the person that's doing the unusual thing that opens up a new set of possibilities, right? I agree.
And you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to go with what they say. But you have to, one of the things I share, one of my favorite books, which is behind me here, is Defeat into Victory by Field Marshal Viscount Slim, who I think the best British military leader of World War II. And one of the things that Slim did that is amazing is when he took command of Commonwealth forces in the India-Burma theater, he telegrammed one of his old classmates from Sandhurst, who was now a brigadier general, and he said, "I want you to come and join my staff." And he said, "Great. What's my staff position going to be?" He says, "You're not going to have a position." He says, "Your position on my staff is for the rest of the war. Every time I come up with a plan, a strategy, I want you to tell me why it's going to fail." And Slim writes in this book that for the next 3 years, in which he's the only person who fights a successful ground war against the Japanese in history, he never fails to listen to the input of this guy, but he never abandons a plan once because of what he says, but he also never fails to modify it based on
makes the better plan. Exactly, right. Isn't it? That's
and
the whole
I think
point.
That's the key, is you don't have to go with what the negative Nelly says, but you need to think about the questions they're asking.
Yeah, I love that.
Very powerful.
Yeah, really powerful.
Excellent. Great stuff. Such a pleasure to have you on the show, Oliver.
Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, really enjoyed this chat. I'm kind of pumped. I was fed up of hearing my own voice. I'm a little
You
more...
were tired when you came on, weren't you? And look at you now, smiling and happy.
It's a good conversation is like an espresso, right?
As we said, it's all about good people and good conversation. But no, brilliant, Oliver. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you've got a full schedule of doing this often, so it's been a real pleasure to have you on The Thinking Leader with us.
Thanks, gents.